Mr. Harry, how are you doing?
Hello, Dike. I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because of how I was introduced to you. Someone spoke about a leadership boot camp that took place at QRC. We're not getting into that as yet, but I want to start off with education and where it is you see education at this point in time across the landscape of Trinidad and Tobago.
Dike, interesting because as I, leaving Trinidad and Tobago and spending a lot of my life outside of Trinidad and Tobago has given me a sort of an interesting gallery from which to view my home country. And as I look into Trinidad and Tobago, my view around on education is that we must, this is an important point for us to step back and understand or identify what education should be and could be for us. But first, we must understand or must try to figure out at least where are we taking our country? Where's our country going? Where's that North Star, right? Or as the Saudi Aramco is keen to say, the golden quadrant. Where's Trinidad and Tobago headed, or desired future state? If we understand that, and we understand therefore what are the capabilities and competencies required to get us there, then we can work backward, right? And begin to define what education should be and how it should be structured. A lot of conversations taking place today in Trinidad and Tobago, as far as I'm concerned, they are moot and academic because we have not done that first step. We don't know what are the competencies we're trying to develop. We don't know for what and why we have SEA, for example. What is SEA testing? What is our CXC testing? We don't know, all right? Added to that is that we have not made enough allowances in Trinidad and Tobago for people with different intelligences, right? You know, traditionally, people speak of intelligence from the perspective of IQ, all right? Howard Gardner, a Harvard psychologist, came up with the idea a few years ago that there are multiple intelligences, not just one. So I think he identified 8 of them. When we look at Trinidad and Tobago today, we look at the different thinking styles, the different behaviors, the different preferences. Is our education system inclusive enough, right, to bring all of those together for the greater good? So all of those are some high-level thoughts about where I see education today and some of the gaps as I perceive them.
And I love the fact that you bring up the issue of multiple intelligences, because Albert Einstein, he says that if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, you're always going to find that fish wanting and look and saying, okay, well, this person or this individual is less than. And that also brings me to the point of education or the role of education. Do you see that as having changed or becoming more acute during and coming out of this pandemic? Because I'll say, Mr. Harry, the teachers I most clung to, the ones who resonated with me, they didn't give me all the answers. But at the same time, they used to fat up my head and leave me with more questions. And I went elsewhere trying to bring that dissonance down and in understanding the questions a little more. I came to a level of understanding that I think holds me, even to this day, in a better place, as opposed to just someone saying, okay, well, this is the answer for this question, go forth.
And therein lies a major issue. Lloyd Bess was fond of talking about critical thinking and critical analysis. If we continue to style our education in the way we have, with rote learning and repetition and so on, right? How do we get there? You raised the important point about questioning. We do not have a questioning society, right? We have a society that sort of takes positions. It's either right or it's wrong. And the world we live in today is a much more nuanced world. right? There may be 2 rights, or there may be 4 rights, okay? There's hardly ever is there one. But you see, to get to there, we have to sort of begin to school ourselves on asking the questions, because there's a very popular book written a few years ago. I forgot the author's name, Marilee, I think Marilee, I don't remember her last name. But that, what she spoke about was changing your questions and changing your life. Because in asking the appropriate question, right, you arrive at a different place. Rather than someone telling you something, if they ask you, as those teachers would have asked you, that allowed you then to go out and fashion your interpretation of the data out there and build a much more critical perspective of that data, of where you can take it, right? So all of those are some of the nuances that we must build into our education system. And those, how do you test those? How do you examine those? How do you assess those? SCA will not do it. Now, I would leave whether we keep SCA or rid of it. I would leave that to the politicians and to the technocrats. But I know that I would like to see my children, if I have any, our grandchildren, growing up in a society where they are learning the art of questioning and they are learning the art of thinking, as opposed to memorizing a formula or memorizing a certain set of data and reproducing it on a piece of paper. I think the world has gone way past that already.
Mr. Harry, one of the reasons I don't like talking to people like you is that the time runs out too quickly, because you're talking now and you're sending me back to Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and you're talking about the banking system where you just crack someone's head open, put in knowledge, and then they're supposed to regurgitate it on paper. And in that sort of way, it seems as though knowledge can be something that is foreign to us. Learning is something that is foreign to us, as opposed to saying, okay, well, this is the information that I am now bringing to bear on this situation that I have. How do I look at it critically and succeed or find the answer to the question that I'm asking? Once again, we go back to questioning. And I think part of the issue with those nuances is those nuances are harder to assess, to say, okay, well, you have achieved this level, so we can send you down the pipeline. But even if you're not talking about whether or not we do away with SCA and saying that's a conversation for another day, another set of people and circumstances, how can we bring some of those nuances into the existing system that we have?
We got to spread a broader net, all right? Very early on in a child's life, we must begin to reframe the art of learning, if you want to call it that, from kindergarten, preschool, Montessori, etc. And we must properly equip our teachers, right, or our coaches, if we want to call them that. Some places have already started moving away from the use of the word teachers to more to coaches, right, as people facilitate learning and facilitate growth. So we have to begin to retrain them to identify some of those different traits very early on, all right? Very early on, for example, and here we talk, let me just take a quick dive into neurodiversity. Very early on, for example, if a child is identified as being neurodiverse, right, and somewhere on one of the autistic spectrum or spectrum or other areas, Asperger's, wherever, if we have teachers able to identify those traits very early on and get proper testing and assessments of those children, what happens immediately is that we can better integrate them, especially when they bring some very different thinking styles and approaches to problems. So we need to fashion an education system that is inclusive and allows us to bring our whole selves into the classroom and into the world of work.
And we have about 2 minutes, well, 1.5 minutes on this side of the conversation, but how can we start to tweak the system while there are teachers with the resources that they have currently? How can we start moving towards that, so that it's not as though, okay, well, we need to tear everything down, but we can start to move towards widening that net while we're still casting that net into the sea or the ocean?
But we have an infrastructure, right? We have an infrastructure in which we have tertiary education. We have UWI. We have many different institutions across Trinidad and Tobago. But we need to first start with that vision and that understanding of where we want to go, and then begin to approach the researchers at UWI, at the various teachers' colleges, etc. And our current crop of teachers are very talented people. They're very poorly treated in many cases, but they're very talented people. They work hard. They're very dedicated, right? I have looked at the work that they all put in, and for the most part, these are people who are conscientious and want to do better. So if you help them to understand what's in it for them, as you try to coach them and move them towards a different approach, I think they will move. And we back it up with the proper research, with the proper training, the continuing education. They have 2 months between July and August where they are paid. And I think that if teachers are asked to attend continuous education classes or development classes, I think they will, as long as people are taught, or not taught rather, but people are encouraged and by understanding proper incentives around what's in it for me, what's in it for my development, what's in it for my capability, how much more exciting is this going to make my job, right? Those are the conversations we need to have with teachers and schools today.
And I think we're going to continue this conversation on the other side of the break. Stay with us. We are speaking with Mr. Brian Harry. Very interesting conversation, looking to the other side of it. Stay with us. We return with more. And welcome back. We are speaking with management consultant Brian Harry. And one of the things you said just before we took the break, Mr. Harry, is that there's that 2-month period. People are starting to call it Java, the July-August vacation at this point in time. But there's something that you were involved in that I want to use as a jump-off point and see if you can scale the conversation up. This is a boot camp that took place at QRC. Take me through the overview of that, please. What's the rationale behind it?
Well, so QRC, let me go back to that. QRC, let's think about the place where it was held. QRC has a rich legacy of having provided, through our nation's history, a significant number of leaders, thinkers, shapers, movers, activists, etc. And over the years, QRC has become a little bit commoditized in some regard, pulled into the mainstream. And that is a leadership issue in and of itself, but we'll get there in a minute. All right. And I know that the current principal, the Old Boys Association, and so on, are very interested in rebuilding a lot of that culture, the culture of leadership, the culture of transformation, right? The culture of renaissance, if you want to call it that, at the college, right? And as a person who's been involved in work around leadership for a while now, and and something that is very dear to me, because I understand and I realize and I accept that all of these changes that we are talking about, there must be a spark somewhere that gets it going. And that spark is is what I call within that whole leadership framework. So it was in that context, therefore, that this boot camp came about. All right. And the purpose of the boot camp was to have 7 days of a very, very intense, immersive, right, experiential process where we had 44 participants. These participants were students at Queen's Royal College, some parents, some teachers. All right. So it was a mixed group, a very diverse group. We had a visually impaired student as a member of the class. We had an autistic as a member of the class. And the topics we covered were talking about vision, understanding what vision is and what it is not, talking about purpose, right, as opposed to mission. And we can talk about purpose a little more, right, and shaping and defining a purpose and understanding, therefore, what each person in that class, but everyone is going to have a different definition. And I want to encourage that, because you don't want to force fit a definition into everyone. And I think that's a part of the conversation about inclusion, right? So you want to give people the tools and have them come up with their own working definition of what leadership is and what it is not, all right? And for me, the working definition I come with is that leaders identify needs or gaps in whether it be in their communities, their countries, or globally. And they shape visions as to how they want to close those gaps, and they come up with processes. They build teams to execute and implement. All right. So in other words, leaders bring about transformative change through people. All right, and that is my working definition of it. Now within the program, we started off very powerfully with on Sunday. That was Sunday the 21st, with a conversation around vision. And as a part of that, I asked the question of the class, what are your thoughts? And this was the question which they all had to stand individually and answer. What are your thoughts on leadership in Trinidad and Tobago today? Interestingly, many of the participants did not have a point of view. However, when we got into the week of sessions, people were able to identify leaders outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So it is not that they don't have a perspective of leadership. It is that somewhere or the other along the way, they are either disenchanted or disconnected from leadership within Trinidad and Tobago, because they did understand and they were able to highlight other leaders elsewhere, whether it be in sport and entertainment and industry, wherever, all right, and speak very eloquently about them. All right. So we discussed that. We went into talking about the different styles, leadership styles. Right. We spoke also about being very deliberate as a leader, and then started to look at some of the traits that good leaders come to the table with. Okay, so we spoke quite a bit about empathy and about the willingness to be vulnerable, right? Courage. We spoke about fear and shame. All right. We spoke about the different motivations that leaders may have. All right. And then speaking about these, then we spoke about how do you identify a leader, an effective leader, all right? And finally, how do you assess leadership? So we actually came up with a framework for assessing leaders, right? With 4 parts. The first part being the ability and the willingness to take a long view, have a long view. That is the ability to think strategically, all right? Building teams, so getting people inspired, right, and enrolled in your vision, basically. Right? Collaboration. How do you work across different boundaries? Again, this comes back to, and this is why I spoke earlier about our fractured society, all right, or fractured nation. Right, we have to be able to work across the lines, right? That's an important assessment metric for leaders. And finally, results.
In terms of working across those lines and the results, Mr. Harry, we have 3 minutes, and I have 3 questions. So, one, what was that experience like having this group of 44 individuals as a microcosm of wider society, inclusive of individuals who had different learning styles, one who's visually impaired, one who's autistic? 2, what kind of rapport was there? And I'm thinking specifically about that dynamic, having teachers who are normally in a place of power, but then now they're participant, as well as parents, and mixing that with the students. And then 3, closing comments.
Well, it was very inspiring for me. It gave me great hope. And I remember at the end of it saying that Trinidad and Tobago is in good hands, right? One of the things that we started the workshop with is that there are no titles here. I am firmly of the view that over the years, we have held on to titles, Dr. this and Mr. this and miss this, and he is president of this and president of that, and it becomes an obstacle to free flow and conversation. So we start off with this idea that we can respect each other without actually adhering to these titles. All right, so that's the first thing. And that the dynamic, therefore, was one where after day 2, when everyone was warm to each other, now you had a back and forth of exchange between the students and the teachers, the students and the parents, parents and the teachers, etc. And so it was a fantastic interplay of ideas, of thoughts, of challenges, all right, and of people adopting different positions and postures depending on the questions and concerns in the room. So there was a lot of richness, right? Each individual came out of there with a project, a pet project that they are going to work on over the next 6 to 12 months. Some of these projects, I was astounded by the brilliance of some of the ideas that came out, right? So when, for example, you have a 12-year-old child, a boy, telling you about how he wants to end hunger and homelessness across Trinidad and Tobago, and what he sees as a project, all right? That is inspiring, right? When a fifth former says to you, in my community, we have an issue with potholes and poor roads and infrastructure, and he comes up with an idea to build a community project, build cohesion into the community, bring the community together to repair the infrastructure in the community, that's inspiring, right? We had many different ideas. We also had a police officer in the class who was a parent, and so her idea, for example, around policing, which is going to be her pet project over the next 12 months, right? Again, all of these gave glimmers of hope, told me that Trinidad and Tobago can indeed be an innovative, creative, positive, and productive society, and that our people do have, we possess the potential, and we can accomplish these great things if only we just understand leadership at different levels in the society and not only look towards the elected officials as leaders.
And the third question I had, Mr. Harry, that I will save as a comment, is that what is inspiring in this conversation that we're having now is your use of language, and I extrapolate that as to the use of language in leadership. There've been things that you have not agreed with, positions that you have not agreed with, but you haven't denigrated, you haven't just pulled it down, you haven't said this is the worst of the worst, but respectively, you've had different views and you've brought it across like this as something that perhaps we could look at this instead of this. And I think that is something that we should all take and use as a page. But thank you so much for the time. Like I said, the time has gone, but we want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing some tidbits, some nuggets of wisdom. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth. Thank you so much for joining us.